Hello there, Justin. It's great to see you there. Welcome. How it is in States right now where you are?
I'm in North Carolina, so it's a little bit humid right now. We just got off a kind of unseasonably warm snap, but I guess everything is unseasonably warm right now. So
Absolutely. So, yeah, we just published our brand update on our website in which we talked a little bit about the brand development, but also the changes in your life and your work with us currently. So, can you very quickly sum it up for the people on the stream here? What exactly changed?
yeah, for the longest time, I was there in Stockholm. I couldn't get my kids into Stockholm, and so after not being with my family for a year, I had to relocate back to the states to be with them. Obviously, I miss you guys. It's here when we have our meetings like really early in the morning or really late during the day. I feel like there's. I wish I was back there in the office with y'all. It would just be so much easier to communicate.
I need to ask that. I mean, I miss you too a lot, but I am wondering, what do you miss the most about Sweden? Is it the kanelbulle or something else?
No, no, I can do my own cinnamon rolls here, but I tell you what I miss most is I'm gonna sound like an old man, but I'm grasping about the weather. Like, oh, I
Mm.
love it cold and dark. I love like especially later in the Swedish winter where it's like 4 in the afternoon and it's dark as midnight. Oh, give me that, give me that.
I would exchange very happily with you currently, as it's getting much darker outside. But yeah, as much as we miss you a lot in the office, I'm very happy that we still can work with you and still work on the IP development, which we are doing very intensely this year. We've been keeping a lot of things under the wraps just because we were working on so much and making the decisions about what to do next. And of course, something that our fans were waiting a lot for are any updates about Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition. Can you sum up how was the work on Werewolf looking like this year?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I wish we would have been able to share more, but the way we are working on Werewolf, there is a lot that has changed. There's been a lot of work updating Werewolf to kind of more modern sensibility. On the plus side, like Native American consultants, and it is a pair of them. One of them is a Menominee PhD. She has a PhD in education, and the other consultant we're working with is a tribal elder of the Ojibwe, who is also a former tribal council member. So we're getting their perspectives on some of the changes that we're making to Werewolf. Obviously, the Werewolf kind of culture is set up so that there are these tribes, and previously there were a lot of tribes that were specifically tied to like real world
Hmm.
cultures. What we're trying to do in Werewolf 5 is break a little of that away, so it's no longer, oh, you're this background, okay, you have to be this tribe. Instead, we're trying to open up the tribes so that you fit them kind of conceptually, and you can be any real world cultural background you want. So if you choose to have a Native American silent strider, great, no problem. If you choose to have a North African Black Fury, great. It all fits that way. So we're trying to open that up to be a little more inclusive, and so that, of course, has made some changes to the kind of structure of werewolf society itself and the world itself.
Of course, and that it's great to hear, tribes are staying because a lot of people were speculating whether the tribes are going to stay or not. What other changes can we expect from War of the Apocalypse 5th edition now that we are pretty advanced in the development?
Sure, sure. Yes, the tribes are staying. There are 11 playable tribes in the core book as we're working on. Um, all of the 13 tribes that were present from the previous editions do still exist in the world, but let's say that some of their perspectives have changed. One of the tribes has basically had it with the Guru and is trying to seek solutions elsewhere. One of the other tribes probably doesn't have that positive and outlook there. They don't necessarily have as bright a future. But one of the things that is significant in Werewolf as we go into the fifth edition, a new edition is a chance to do things differently, right? If you're just going
Hmm.
to do kind of a continuation, you would continue supporting an earlier edition as opposed to developing a new edition. And so one of the perspectives that has changed for the new edition is the fact that there's a lot of young werewolves who no longer think that we are, fighting to hold the apocalypse at bay. It's almost a post-apocalypse sort of situation. I don't say that to get people thinking like, it's Mad Max or something like that, but
Yeah.
instead, we're in kind of a world that is almost in its death throes, right? And as humans, we don't typically observe it. We're happy we've got, high-speed internet and video games, and what we don't realize is that we're kind of the frog slowly being boiled, slowly being boiled. So from
Hmm.
the perspective of a lot of these young werewolves, the apocalypse has come and gone, and now they're having to kind of fight back to take back the gains that this apocalypse has given to this cosmological entity. The worm is trying to hasten the world into entropy, into destruction, and so now these young werewolves feel this desperation to take things back. They've lost a lot of cairns. They've been broken off from the Umbra. The Umbra is now a very scary place that almost even ejects werewolves from it. So there's a lot more. There's a new perspective on the horror of being a werewolf, and there's a lot more immediate call to action. So it's less of go fight that logging camp, and it's more you've lost your sept, you've lost your cairn, go take it back.
Hmm.
The other werewolves, one of the things that I think is fascinating about werewolf culture is the conflict between the tribes itself. So that's been turned up a little bit. The Black Spiral Dancers are quite active. There is another tribe that has arguably perhaps fall into the worm. Moreover, I think they express a new concept that we're bringing to werewolf called hoglosk, which is kind of a counterpoint to Harano.
Hmm.
Harano is when you get so, it's this feeling of almost despair or depression, like, oh, nothing I can do is going to change the world. The worm has already won. At the other end of the spectrum is this idea of hoglosk, this, hey, my way or the highway. We have to fucking change things. We've got to act now. We've got to act now. And if you don't do it with me, you're part of the worm, obviously. So there's this kind of like almost hysterical zeal that can overtake werewolves at some point. And this one tribe that has fallen to that is just the primary example of that.
That's great. And so people that were coming to Vampire the Masquerade with V5 could expect stories that explored very much how humanity works and how people are vampires are clinging to humanity. What stories can we expect from Werewolf the Apocalypse V5? What's going to be the focus?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here, we wanted to definitely use one of the things that I think was really strong about Werewolf throughout all of the previous editions, and that's the idea of renown. And so, one of the things that we're really leaning into for Werewolf 5 is this idea of renown. That a werewolf is literally trying to build their legend. The more and more they do, they're working with their pack to accomplish things, but really they want to. Arguably, there's this sort of apotheosis at the end where if you die fighting, you can arguably become this representation of renown.
Hmm.
And renown becomes much more important in terms of some game systems. One of the things that we're working with, I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, but gifts come from your relationship with spirits, and spirits respect your renown. So when you use a gift, you're actually invoking your renown as opposed to making, purely a skill and attribute roll. So it becomes more about your relationship with the spirit world to use a gift than to just, use, the basic things, the basic components of your werewolf. You're actually calling in the spirits to grant you a boon, to grant you a gift, to help you in this case.
Of course, and we are going to have a lot of brand new people coming to Werewolf, but also old fans of previous Werewolf the Apocalypse editions that are going to very much look forward to this update. What other significant changes and updates can they expect?
Yeah, this werewolf is again an opportunity for us to take a new look at werewolf. And one of the things that I think we want to set aside from previous editions in the interest of making things more inclusive, we're getting rid of the idea of the metis, for
Hmm.
example, right? Like it's 2021 right now. We're going to be publishing werewolf very soon, and one of the things I didn't want werewolf to focus on was the circumstances of your birth, or the purity of your breed, or the fact that if you are born in this certain way that somehow makes you lesser. I didn't want to carry those ideas over into New Werewolf, and I think that will resonate with the community as well. So there are certain elements of the previous assumptions of Werewolf that we're going to set aside, and we've gone back to even things like the litany, where we're striking from the litany, the idea that Guru shall not mate with Guru. Like, man, the Guru have more problems right now than who you're sleeping with. So let's not worry about that. Love who you love and focus on taking back the world from this apocalypse that's crushing it.
I love this. So, somewhere during this year, during the development of Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition, the decision was made that we need more time to work on Werewolf, just because of course, all these sensitivity issues and making sure that we make this edition the best possible, but also shifting focus to developing something else. Can you tell us a little bit how this happened and what was the reasoning behind this?
Sure, sure. Yes, as you say, the more we got into Werewolf, the more we looked at, is this a viable idea today? And I have I have all of the drafts from all of the writers for Werewolf, but we're still basically baking it. That being the case, we wanted to bring to players an additional World of Darkness experience, but Werewolf wasn't quite ready to do that. So one of the things that we do have on the back burner that we've been cooking for a while now is a new edition of Hunter the Reckoning. And I think this is a particularly resonant idea because this in vampire, the notion that we're in the time of the Second Inquisition is very strong, and so vampires obviously see these hunters as primary antagonists. But also, the way we wanted to look at Hunter to provide, again, a new addition, a new experience, is that for Hunter the Reckoning, we want players to be that kind of almost coterie style. You're the young group of hunters, you're the street level group of hunters, you're the individual hunters. You're not Special Affairs Division, you're not the Information Awareness Office, you're not Project First Light, because
Hmm.
all of those groups actually have kind of their own agendas. You, as an individual hunter or as a hunter who is part of a cell of hunters, you want to take the night back from these monsters, right? And so these antagonists, these orgs, are trying to fight back the monsters, but they're doing it to impose their own social order. Like obviously the SAD, as a branch of the FBI, they're very invested in the status quo, right?
Hmm.
And so the way we see the player in the World of Darkness is always the agent of change. So you are, this individual hunter going at it on their own. And much as vampires see these big orgs of hunters as the antagonists, they're also kind of your antagonists. They're willing to, maybe write a contract, and we'll work with a small group of freelance hunters, and they're going to use you like the canary in the coal mine, right? Like, oh, go over there. We think there's vampires over there. So you've got this very tense relationship with the orgs, but also you have to deal with the monsters up in front first and foremost, right? So you've got these primary monsters, you've got these secondary antagonists, and so there's this interesting conflict triangle of the hunters versus the monsters versus the orgs that exist to enforce the status quo. If there's one thing you don't want as a hunter, it's more status quo, because the status quo equals these overbearing government agencies and also these extremely monstrous antagonists. You've got to fix that, right? And you do it, one night at a time, one monster at a time, one conflict at a time.
That's amazing. And when you're coming to World of Darkness, let's say starting from Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, and you know about some vampire hunters existing within the SI, what can you expect from Hunter when you jump from it to it from Vampire?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know that these organizations are out there, and this is one of the things I really enjoy about the kind of starting, the initial level of play, is that you don't know a whole lot, and so the game becomes very much an experience of learning. So it's
Hmm.
not necessarily get in there and go fist fight vampires. It's very much a, you think a vampire exists, you and this, this cell, this group of other weirdos, outsiders, people who know monsters exist, because the rest of the world doesn't. Now you have to find out, okay, well, is that a vampire? Okay, it is a vampire. We know they're drinking blood. We've seen them abducting people, et cetera, et cetera. And now you need to figure out more and more about this vampire. So it's not just necessarily jump in guns blazing. You can do that. It won't necessarily be very successful, but it's very much about the discovery of the monster, about the learning. And so you can play it, as a high action setting. You can play. It's really much more designed to be focused on almost like a thriller, where you're
Hmm.
learning more and more about this monster. And maybe it turns out, oh my gosh, that's not a vampire at all. It's a werewolf who's abducting these people and doing it, these things. And so we break it out almost by ratio. There's literally a schematic in the book that I'm working with Thomas, the art director, on, about how much of your time can you spend learning, how much of your time can you spend building your action, and then enacting your actual strategy is a small but extremely important part of the hunter experience.
Hmm.
So it can do everything from go fight ghouls immediately to, oh my gosh, we think there's a vampire, and then 3 months later we're ready to do something about the vampire. And of course, because it's the World of Darkness, everything comes at a cost, right? There's these moral costs of, we don't want to act against the vampire too early because we're not sure about it. But every night that goes by, maybe they're taking another victim, right? And so there's this risk, there's this tension of, when do we go? When do we go? And then, of course, like I was saying earlier, you're after this vampire, but also SAD has been watching this vampire, or the Society of St. Leopold is in there too. So are they using you to flush out the vampire? Do they even know about you? When you show up, is there this tense three-way standoff between you and the Inquisitors and the monster itself? There's so much room for story to develop here.
That's a really cool trinity of powers in Hunter. But I'm wondering, I feel like it's much easier to describe for starting players why vampires are cool or why werewolves are cool, because hey, they're monsters. They have those supernatural powers. They have disciplines, clans, tribes, gifts. What about hunters? What's so cool about the hunter that would make people want to play them?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. One of the things that we always like to do with the World of Darkness is provide like a group that you can identify with. And so we've borrowed a little bit from the previous editions of Hunter for this. We're not carrying over the idea of the imbued themselves, but what we are carrying over is the idea of there are these creeds, there are
Mm-hmm.
these outlooks that you take to the world. And so your creed might be based on your faith, or it might be based on your ability to bring weapons to bear, or it might be based on the idea of vampires often move in these subcultures, or monsters often move in these subcultures. So kind of who and where you can move in these subcultures. So all of these kind of form the foundation of the idea of creeds. So players will have creeds that they choose and belong to. And also one of the things that players will have in terms of the get shit done abilities, we're calling those again edges that we borrow from earlier edition. And edges is kind of, they're not necessarily supernatural this time around, but they're the things that hunters have access to because of their creed, because of their drive,
Mm-hmm.
that gives them these little bit kind of above your basic human competency things. This may be access to an arsenal. This may be something like true faith or some other otherworldly investment. It may be a pronounced amount of access, right? You may have at one point worked for one of these orgs, and so you still have backdoor access to their database, and you can figure things out that way. So there's a variety of think of it as the hunter's toolkit. And when previously I said too, hunters are all driven, one of the things that makes hunters different from just a person with a gun who knows about vampires is their drive. There is some reason, there is some burning passion they have to take back the night from these monsters. And that drive represents we'll start to share a little bit more of the mechanical insights of Hunter with the community very soon.
Mm-hmm.
But every hunter is a hunter for a reason. They're all driven to do it for something.
That's great. And can you share with us what is the current state of hunter development?
At the end of this week, I'm so close. I'm so close. I have 2 more org write-ups to finish to get done. I have some connective tissue to turn in, but we are ready to hand the manuscript over to Thomas. Has already been starting some art direction on it. Hopefully we can share some art from it soon. I need to turn it over to editing next. I need to turn it over to our diversity reader next, and then we can get the book. It's already in some amount of layout, and then we can get it put together and sent off to our publishing partners at Renegade.
That's amazing. So, of course, we are not giving exact dates just yet because of the current ongoing global shipping crisis, and some of these things may make things a little bit longer, but we really hope to deliver Hunter to people soon. And I did confirm with Thomas, I can say it already, that we will going to have some art to share just this month. So
Good.
we're going to definitely share some more things with the community. All right, so now that we talk about Werewolf and Hunter, I want to very quickly go back to Vampire, and thank you very much for sharing your chronicle creation blog post with us last week. It was really amazing. Can you give us a little bit more of a, I want to say promotion, but can you tell us a little bit more about this blog and 2 of the story blogs that you have written, so people that may have not seen them already may just go and check them out?
Sure. That is one of the things that I have noticed most about working on World of Darkness in the 5th edition, is that we have a lot of new players. In fact, I don't have the most current data survey, but we have more new players at this point than we have longstanding players.
Yeah.
And so many of the things that these new community members are asking is they may not even have come to tabletop RPGs through the traditional vector of, oh, I've played, with friends, or, maybe they come to it through LA by Night, or maybe they come to it, some other manner of discovery besides just playing at the table. So for many players, there's how do I put this together? And that was really the thinking behind that the blog post there about how you build a story. Is if you've never done this before, start thinking of a story in terms of its atomic units. What do you need? How do you create conflict? What is going to keep the players invested? As a player, what is my role at the table? The storyteller needs to do something, the player needs to do something. And so the idea of we're introducing players to not just the hobby of tabletop RPGs, but the methods by which they're going to construct the stories that they collectively tell at the table. And so that's what we're trying to do a lot with the blogs is, for long-term players, these are maybe different ways to think about it. You've done it this way forever. So, maybe you can start thinking about it this way. So there's new thought there. But also for the players that we're introducing to the community, here's how you do this from ground zero. What is the first thing I do when I want to start telling a story? Think about your conflict. Here's a couple of conflicts that can work for Vampire. Think about how your players are going to react with it. Here's some points at which they can touch the story and change the outcomes. Again, like I was saying earlier, the players are always the agents of change. So, as a storyteller, you're building something that you want them to touch and move the pieces of. You're not building a museum exhibit that they, aren't allowed to change.
Yeah.
You're kind of setting up the blocks for them to come in and kick apart, right?
Yeah, sure. And I've been storytelling plenty in my life, but still, this gave me a lot of very cool ideas. So thank you so much for sharing these because they're super insightful. Folks, if you want to check them out, they're on worldofdarkness.com website. So they're there already. And yeah, I think that's all, Justin. Thank you so much for sharing your insight about Werewolf Hunter. Cannot wait to share more with the community. And I wish you, crossing my fingers for the work on Hunter to finish successfully this week. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
Bye.